Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Digital Minute. Today's webinar topic is content strategy versus content marketing, and we're going to jump right into it because we've got a lot of great stuff brought to you by Colleen Reese, NetPlus's Director of Content Strategy. She's going to take you through some slides, some examples. We would love to get your questions, and I will send it off to Colleen right now.
Cool. Hey guys, as Robin mentioned, I'm the Content Strategy Director here. And in the last video, we talked a little bit about content strategy and content marketing. And today we're really going to do a bit of a deep dive into both. And then take a look at whether or not it's a good time for content strategy to be a part of your business, what to look for in a content strategist. And then I'll show you some real life examples of the type of work that a content strategist does. But before we get started, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping real quick. You can use the chat box or the question module to submit a question anytime, and we can answer them during the webinar, or we'll wait till the end. We will have some time for Q&A, so submit your questions anytime, use the chat function to talk to anybody, and just let us know. Before we take a deep dive into content strategy, I just wanted to, step back a little bit and take a look at kind of the history of both content marketing and content strategy from people who have really been kind of determined as the experts. So in about 2009, Christina Halverson, who owns a content strategy agency called Brain Traffic, wrote a book called Content Strategy for the Web. And that's really kind of the foremost literature of the discipline. She does a great job of explaining what content strategy is and how it can be applied to businesses. And then in 2012, a guy named Joe created a book called Epic Content Marketing, and he runs an organization called the Content Marketing Institute, which is also a super great resource for content professionals. And so really at that time, there was this resurgence of interest in content strategy and content marketing as something that is a really viable business solution and something that brought a lot of value to things like websites or mobile applications. And so there was a ton of content created about the subject. And so both of them have really great definitions for what each one of these practices does. And this was mentioned in our video, but I just wanted to reiterate it because I think it's such a great definition for content strategy. And so at this time, this is how the two disciplines were really defined. And so Christina says that content strategy plans for the creation, publication, and governance of useful, usable content. So there's a lot about planning in here. There's a lot about setting a strategic foundation. And this is really what differentiates content strategy from content marketing. In terms of content marketing, the definition is a marketing technique. And I think that this is the really crucial differentiation point here, is that content marketing is absolutely about marketing. So Joe says that content marketing is a marketing technique of creating and distributing relevant and valuable content to attract and acquire and engage a clearly defined and understood target audience with the objective of driving profitable customer action. So there's still a lot that these two definitions have in common, but I think the fact that Joe mentions that content marketing is really specifically a marketing technique is one really great way and a really simple way to remember the difference between the two. Now, when we think back around this time, this is when we were hearing things like content is king and create great content. And we heard, a lot of adages that are like, right content, right people equals action. And so we as digital professionals and content marketers created a ton of content at that time. I think we still have so much leftover content from like the early teens of 2000 because all of the advice was really saying, if you create content, people are going to come to your website. They're gonna buy from you, and if the content is relevant, you're gonna make a lot of money online. And we wound up kind of with a problem, which is that we really didn't know what to do with all of that content. We were producing blog posts at a rate that was fairly exponential. Social media was booming at the time. Email marketing had reached full maturation, and so the internet was just flooded with all of this content. And we wound up with these super bloated websites that had, you know, way more content that they needed because, you know, the overall advice was to create, create, create. And I think that this cued the need for more definition around what content professionals do and what each practice can really accomplish for your business. And so this is one of the ways that I tend to differentiate between the two of them. And so we've already talked a little bit about the differences between content marketing and content strategy, but I think there's actually something in the middle there that's content planning that has a lot of overlap between the two. So just to go over it one more time, you know, content marketing, we're really focusing primarily on the creation and distribution of content, often in a marketing or advertising setting. So responsibilities of the content marketer will often include things like content ideation, so coming up with ideas for new blog posts or a new way to use email marketing. They might plan the actual content and creative execution of your social media campaigns. They'll do a lot of editorial planning. So what's upcoming on your blog? You know, what are you really looking to produce on your website, or, you know, on a delivery application, or maybe on your new Instagram page. They also do quite a lot with delivery. So planning the targeting, they want to know which distribution channels are going to be prioritized over another, and a lot of campaign development. So what's the messaging? You know, what are we really going to kind of anchor our content around, and then promoting that content. So it's all about the creation and amplification of content. Content planning is that one in the middle here. I think that content marketing almost needs content planning in order to succeed. And this is where we're looking at things like process design. So how is the content going to be produced? Media targeting, so getting very specific about your target audience and who is going to receive the content. Outreach, and so that's things like thinking about influencer marketing and identifying who would be a potential influencer for your brand. They'll think a lot about measurement, so how are we going to define the success of the content that we're creating? And then messaging and voice has a lot to do with brand. And then over on the right side here is really content strategy, which is all about setting a framework for content. And so the responsibilities in content strategy often include things like taking a content audit and keeping you know, an up-to-date inventory of the content on your website or, you know, other content properties. If you have like an intranet, a content strategist can really help you kind of wrangle all of that content through the process of a content audit. Content modeling, which is essentially taking big pieces of content like a website and kind of putting them into their most smallest parts. So a content model is, for example, like if you were creating a new homepage for yourself, each module in that page, a content strategist would break down to its smallest portion. So you would need a hero image, and the hero image needs, you know, an image title and alt text, and really define all of those requirements for a page. Content strategists will also produce things like personas or user personas and profiles. They'll also do a lot with information architecture. You know, the taxonomy and information architecture of your site is something that a content strategist can really contribute to. And finally, governance, which is essentially determining how content will be created, the system of approval, how it gets published, when it gets published, and also a system of measurement. So how often do we take an audit of our content? How often do we measure it against, you know, our goals or benchmarks? And so that's really what governance does. For today, I really wanted to take a deep dive into content strategy and talk a little bit more specifically about what the discipline is and how it can potentially help a business. So a lot of the times when we think about content strategy, it's easy to imagine content strategy as a discipline that determines the what of content. So what kind of content is being created? But there's actually a whole list of questions that are often overlooked that a content strategist really looks at. So the questions that we're really interested in are things like what's next, who creates it, how do we measure it, where is it going to be distributed, and how can we optimize for that distribution channel? For whom is the content being created? What else? You know, like content is not always just one thing. Content can now be, you know, a voice activation. Content can be a text message notification. It can be an email. So not just imagining content simply as an image or a block of text or even a blog post, but thinking of different ways that content can be presented to different people. When or how often is the content published? Why? And of course, how. There are really kind of 4 focus groups focus areas in terms of content strategy, and this is how I kind of like to look at the discipline as a whole. So it's equal parts of kind of a 4-part circle. And the first one is thinking about audience and users, and that's really kind of determining who is going to be using your content, what their specific needs are, what they like, demographics, psychographics, things like that. And really a content strategist can do a lot of value here by interviewing users. They can develop scripts in tandem with your UX team. And the second one on this left side is behavior. So what does your audience like to read? How do they like to consume content? You know, what purchasing behaviors do they exhibit often? What do they like to see in a brand? What do they prefer in terms of user experience? You know, how many apps are on their phones, things like that. And then on this right side, we really get into kind of the more technical aspect of content strategy and thinking about structure. So a lot of the times when we're doing something like a new website or a website redesign, structure is something that a content strategist should really be thinking about quite seriously. You know, how can we structure the content in a way that's meaningful so that people have enough information so that at the point of purchase, they'll be really ready and informed to either make a conversion or perform the next desired action. And then governance again, so deciding, you know, when the content is being made, how it's being made, who's approving it, things like that. So really, in short, content strategy focuses on 2 primary areas. So we looked at 4, but you can kind of really just put them into these 2 buckets. So we look at people and we look at content, and we really kind of take those 2 things and we make them very, very, very much smaller. So if we look back at that graph, we have people here on the left side thinking about audience and users and behaviors, and on the right side thinking about structure and governance, and that's really all about the content. And so those are the ways that you can really easily kind of take those 4 focus areas and put them into 2. A question I often get asked is, what kind of problems can content strategy solve for? So a lot of the similarities between content marketing and content strategy are that we're trying to use content to solve a problem. And so this is a list of common problems that I think content strategy can very easily solve for. So shortening buyer journeys or sales cycles. So this one's really natural. If a user or a prospective buyer is more informed and more engaged at the point of conversion, we're going to shorten that journey. It's not going to take them as long. They won't have as many objections. Maybe you don't have to send them as many emails. And we're really reducing that sales cycle and reducing opportunity cost in the end. Secondly, content strategy can help you manage customer expectations. So this is something that content strategy and user experience really have in common. So the better and more relevant our content is, the less friction a user will feel as they cross between your marketing channels, between the website. And so managing customer expectations is another great way to kind of motivate action and motivate conversions. Thirdly, reducing development and design costs. So when we're looking at something like a major website redesign or even just a huge audit of your existing content, it's very easy to kind of want to just jump into design and development to get a new website, you know, up and running. But when you have a content strategist in place or a content strategy in place, what you're doing is helping the designers and the developers determine the features, function, and meaning of content prior to getting to those stages. So there's less of kind of this backtracking of having to figure that out on the fly. And so I think that that's one of the really most valuable problems that content strategy can solve for. Fourthly, reputation. And this is a really easy one. You know, if people have a good experience on their site, if the content that you're providing them is relevant and useful, your brand and your organization are going to have a good reputation. People are going to have good associations with your brand or organization. And so that's a really easy kind of problem to solve for content strategy. And then finally, retention. So when we think of things like, you know, user wikis or libraries for users, so say you sign up for a new email marketing program and you're having trouble, segmenting your audience in a certain way, or you're having trouble using certain features, that content that's created on the back end to help you use that product is really a form of content strategy and a form of content marketing. And the more that content is there and users can self-serve, the more you're going to retain them, the less they're going to have to sit on the phone with a customer service expert, the less they're going to have to, call their salespeople to complain. If that information is ready for them and it's good and relevant, we're really looking at retaining people for a longer period of time. So kind of in short, our primary objective is to transform intent into action. So all content should really aim to do this. So this is a really interesting kind of mystery of websites that I think people have, and it's a misunderstanding. I've heard a lot of folks believe that when somebody gets to their website, that if they don't immediately want to purchase, then maybe they don't have intent. And that's actually really not true. So every time somebody lands on your website, they have intent. They know what they want to do, even if it's not to buy right away. So nobody lands on your website kind of by accident anymore. There's really no more of these like random URL generators that are just going to drop somebody on a website unknowingly. By the time anybody comes to your site, they have an intention. And sometimes that intention is just to learn more. Sometimes that intention is just to check off a box to say, we did some research, we did some pricing comparison, we looked at some features, but everybody has intent even if they don't buy all the time. So content strategists are not only beholden to things like conversion or, motivating purchases. We know that when folks come, they have intentions, and they're going to have a lot of different intentions when they come to this site. And so our job is to understand what all of those possible intentions are, and then produce content that motivates a next action. So if somebody comes to the site and they're just doing research, you need to have content that's available there and that's structured in the right way to help them kind of move on to the next action. But the idea that intent is only intent to buy should really be something that you take another look at, and that's something that a content strategist can do really well. So what do content strategists do? What do we do every day? And so I wanted to give you a list of common responsibilities for a content strategist in case you're thinking about maybe bringing a content strategist on board in your organization, or perhaps you want to produce a content strategy yourself. So here's a list of common responsibilities that most content strategists have. So the first one, site inventories and audits, is probably the biggest responsibility. Keeping a clear and meaningful inventory of your site's content is probably a content strategist's #1 priority. Secondly, taxonomy and content structure. So again, looking at the information architecture of the site, thinking about how our navigation works and whether or not we can change that a little bit. Editorial strategy, again, there are some shared responsibilities between content strategists and content marketers, and editorial strategy can really fall between the two of them. A content strategist is not necessarily going to say, okay, I want you to produce a blog post on, who buys different ways to produce iced coffee, at home, but they might say, hey, we've been getting a lot of traffic on a landing page about cold brew, so let's produce some content about that, and here's how we can link those pieces of content together so that, we have a strong, fortified internal linking structure. So that's kind of more of the editorial strategy function that a content strategist would have, but they do share some of those responsibilities. Planning and assessment is a huge one. So determining, the type of content that we're going to produce and the assessment cycle. So measurement strategy is a really huge part of content strategy. So how often do we look at our content? How often do we measure it against benchmarks? And then migration. So this is especially important if you are going through any type of redesign or you're producing a new piece of content. Migrating that from one property to the other is something that a content strategist can help you with. And I wanted to give you guys some real world examples of the type of work that a content strategist can do and kind of their function. And so one of the first ones is probably one of the most popular and kind of important right now. And This is an example of a persona we created for a client of ours. And a persona is essentially a visual or fictional representation of your target audience. And so as a content strategist, we took a look at both qualitative and quantitative data to develop this person who kind of represents, our target customer for this particular product. And what we do with the personas is essentially take a look at, all the different psychographic and demographic attributes of that target audience, and we'll create user needs out of this. So for this example, we took a look at, how old is this persona? What's a day in the life like? Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Are they more of a planner or are they more spontaneous? We thought about goals they might have in life at their current stage, frustrations they may have in life. And then we always think about brands and influencers that they're already engaging with, because that will give us some indication of the type of content this person prefers to consume, the type of user experiences or applications they like. So if we know that Ernest is a big Eagles fan, we can kind of bring that into our content strategy. If we know that he buys from Zappos, we can take a look at that purchasing experience. And bring a lot of that information into our own experience, because people like to have familiarity with the experiences that they use online. So if we can mirror some of our, checkout process to a process that he's already very used to, we're producing a great familiar experience, and he's not going to have any of that friction. It's not going to be hard for him to make a purchasing decision. And so additionally, what we can do with this is take a look at, Ernest's frustration, and we can build content around what he's frustrated around. So not enough time in the day could become a whole blog series. It could become a section of the site. It could become an interactive tool. And so these are really super useful tools. And they're definitely kind of a step one. It's a great foundation for things like building user profiles or beefing up what we call a backlog. So those are like the types of needs that need to be represented in a website, and it will help us prioritize the content. So if we know that Ernest, for example, is our primary customer and he represents 60% of our customers, we may tailor more content that represents Ernest than, another persona. And so this is just an example of how I do it, and this template has been really great. And if you're interested, just reach out and I can totally provide you with a template if you want to get started with this in your organization. This is another example of the type of work that a content strategist does. Not all of it is as fun as persona. Some of it is definitely hanging out here in Excel or hanging out in some kind of spreadsheet. This tool is called Airtable, and we use it for content auditing and content tracking. And essentially what we're doing here is taking every page in our website and really running diagnostics on it and seeing, you'll see there's a column over here that says topics. And so we're going to look at, what are the most common topics on the pages of our website, and we'll look for gaps. So if we see that most of our content is around culture and agency, do we want to maybe shift our topics a little bit and create more content that's about creative inspiration or about different types of clients that we service? And so content audits are really great diagnostics tools, and they're really great project management tools. Another example of something that a content strategist may produce is called a page table. And page tables are essentially kind of a pre-wireframe tool that make all of the content determinations for a new landing page, a new website. And we think about things like what questions will a user have at this page? Like if somebody landed on the home page, what questions might they have? What key messages do we need to include? What are the calls to action on this page? Where is the content coming from? So content sources is thinking about who's creating the content for this page. Are we pulling in content from any other pages? So if you have a blog post and you want your most recent blog posts on your home page, this is an example of where we would kind of write that out and really think about it. What images do we need for this page? What links are in this page? What related content? So again, that blog post might be related content if you do anything that requires a recommendation engine. So if you sell books online and you want to recommend similar books, we would kind of outline all of that content there. other notes, and then obviously some more internal items like who is the author of this page, who's the subject matter expert on this page, and what's the review schedule. So how often are we going to review this page? How often does it need to be reviewed? So if it's a landing page and it is assigned to a paid search campaign, the review schedule might be more frequent than something like your company's about page. That might only need to be reviewed, every 6 months or every 9 months. Whereas something that's attached to like an SEM campaign might need to be reviewed every 60 days or every 90 days. In terms of tools for content strategists, this is just a list of the tools that we like to use. Airtable is a really big one right now. We're super in love with Airtable, and it's essentially just a relationship database manager. So it's like Excel, but color-coded and wonderful. You can also use Google spreadsheets. These are things for your audits. Moz is a great diagnostics tool, and it has a lot of SEO extensions in it as well. We also use things like UXPen and Envision. So content strategists have a lot to do with the UX teams and a lot to do with your wireframing and prototyping. And so they should be very familiar with these tools. How we order content or respond to content can be done within those tools. Content discovery and research. There are a ton of tools that can fall under this. I tend to use one that's called Buzzsumo, where you can actually look for influencers or trending content at the same time. And so that's one that I'll look at if I'm trying to make editorial recommendations for a client and they want to know, what are people talking about right now on the subject of, let's say coffee, if they sell coffee. And then finally, artificial intelligence has a huge influence over content strategy. Artificial intelligence can be used to help build personas. So if you don't have a lot of data about your customers, but maybe you have, some basic demographic information, an artificial intelligence tool can actually help you fill out some of that in the aggregate. So if you have basic demos and you want to find out what type of interests, like subject interests your audience has, you can actually employ AI to find people who match that demographic and then expand your targeting and your understanding of your personas and users by using AI to figure out, what do they like to read, what do they purchase, what are their interests, what are they often searching for. And so AI is a really huge tool there to think about. So that's a really broad overview of kind of what content strategy is and what it can potentially do for your business. Also a little bit about the basic and key responsibilities for content strategists should you want to employ one in your organization right now, or if you want to get started with it. Those are really kind of the basics and how to get started. But we wanted to make sure that we saved some time and kept this interactive for Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. And I will turn back on my video. Hey. Let's see if we have any questions. So one really common question is, which is more important, content strategy or content marketing? And the answer is probably a little bit annoying, but it's really neither. It really has to do with what you're trying to do with content at the time or what you're trying to solve for. So if your problem is that you need to acquire more customers, you can probably use a mix of both content strategy and content marketing. So content marketing is really about amplifying your message and distributing new, exciting, original content to unique channels. So you can do that. You can reach new audiences that way through social advertising, through referrals for your email marketing program. But content strategy can also respond to things like customer acquisition. So making your site a little bit more ready to capture new leads by ensuring that your email subscriptions are showing up in the right place to make sure that people understand enough about your email marketing program that they want to convert, and then providing that program with enough compelling content to sustain and maintain it. Let's see. How does content strategy differ from user experience? So content strategy really does kind of sit on the fence with a lot of other disciplines. We play very, very, very nicely with all sorts of different teams, and user experience is probably like our closest like brother or sister, because we go over a lot of the same considerations, which is like, how can we make this particular experience more useful for somebody? And the difference really lies in the fact that a content strategist is going to look at what types of content, what the subject of the content is, what percentage of the content needs to cover subject X versus Y, whereas a user experience specialist is going to take a look at the actual framework and visual representation of the site to understand how can I promote action through design, essentially, or through the information architecture of the site. So they'll look at things like what length does the content need to be in order to get somebody to click a button, or how can we reduce friction between these two particular paths. And so we have a lot of the same considerations in possible. It's just the execution that differs a little bit. A UX person is really going to be looking at how to structure the overall experience, where a content strategist is going to be looking at how to structure content both in the macro and micro to give a good experience. How can I or my organization get started with content strategy? That's a super great question. I would definitely recommend checking out Content Strategy for the Web by Christina Halverson. She does a phenomenal job of explaining the application of content strategy and what it is, and essentially how to get started. I think, secondly, you can also just kind of dive in. Content strategy has a lot of its literature through blog posts, so which I think is a really fun kind of new age thing. Like, we don't have textbooks for content strategy. It's not really a major, but it's something that really anybody can learn by doing and by reading. And so I read a lot from Moz and Content Marketing Institute to think about content strategy. I also read a lot of UX magazines, but I think the first thing that you can really do is conduct an audit. And an audit is my first step in every project. An audit is often the first step in most content strategy practices. So understanding how to conduct an audit is really important. And there are tons of resources. If you just Google how to do a content audit, you will find lots and lots and lots and lots of blog posts on how to do it. I use a tool called Screaming Frog, which is free open source software, which means that anybody can use it for free. And Screaming Frog will crawl up to 500 publicly indexed URLs from your site. And so you can actually take a look at up to 500 pages for free, and you can see, exactly what content is open to the public for your website. And what you'll want to do is pull that into something like an Airtable or Excel or Google spreadsheets or whatever you're comfortable working with in terms of spreadsheets, and really start to organize it in whatever way is most meaningful for your business. So if you are thinking about content from the perspective that you want to create new content, you might take a look at and start categorizing your content by topic. If you produce products, like if you produce software, or you have certain services that are almost considered like a product, like if you provide professional service like accounting or anything like that, you can start to organize them that way. And if you notice that something like a different service offering is kind of less represented on your website than something like accounting is, that gives you a really strong indication that it's time to produce more content on that particular subject. And maybe it's time to repurpose or reuse some of the content that you already have that's working for this other service area. And so definitely get started with an audit and just kind of dive right in. We can provide absolutely the template for page tables, and that's another great way to start. And that's really just training your organization to do things like website redesigns content first and thinking about the content prior to entering design. So that's a really, really phenomenal way to get started. But yeah, I mean, I would just dive in and start reading and take a look at it. Let's see what else we got. What other questions do we have? Whoop. Sorry. What content strategy resources can I take a look at? Definitely Brain Traffic and Christina Halverson. She's totally my hero, and she really wrote the book on it. Moz is a great resource. The resources within Moz are definitely going to be a little bit more SEO oriented, which is another kind of like cousin of content strategy. But they produce some really great blog posts on content strategy, on SEO. Sure. So I just got another question. Can you elaborate more on how artificial intelligence relates to content strategy? Sure. So for the most part, I have thought about artificial intelligence in terms of filling in gaps that we don't have on customer profiling. So there are a lot of like audience, I think it's called audience.ai or networks.ai. There's a lot of tools that will help you produce what are essentially like psychographic information about your customer base or like your overall target audience. So I could employ an AI. I could say, we as Net Plus are looking for female business leaders and owners who have businesses with, X amount of revenue and X amount of employees. Like that could be if that was our primary demographic, I could go to an AI and say, okay, here's some basic demographic information that I have about our target audience. And what the AI is going to do is essentially aggregate all of the public data that we have essentially on that target demographic from social media, from search, from all of these data sources. And what it's going to do is spit out an expanded profile of those people. So the AI might tell me that the most common application that this target demographic uses is Facebook and Gmail. It might tell me that their purchasing behaviors fall in, peak in the fall and winter. And so what we can do with that is essentially take a look at our website and diagnostically understand, how ready is our website to receive this demographic given this new information that we have, and how can we optimize it further. So if we found out that, we needed to put more content on our website in the fall because that's when our target demographic is doing the most purchasing, that's one way that AI can absolutely help us, build a content strategy. And this is just one example of seasonality, but interest-based are a really easy one, or question-based. So if we see that our target demographic has, a really common interest in productivity applications, we may create some content on our website, or we may create an application that responds to that interest as a way to reach our target demographic. Or we may produce some blog content or some interactive tools on the site that respond to that, like here's how to build a content strategy in 10 minutes, or here's how to make a more productive content practice at your organization. And so it's both subject recommendations, so things that people are interested in, but also quantitative data on your audience. And so the more that you know about, who your user profile is or who your target demo is, that will really help you determine the type of content that you need, the order that it needs to be in. So again, to use that example, like if they're prioritizing productivity over, or here's a different one. If the priority is speed of reporting over, length of reporting, we know that we can create shorter reports, faster reports, things like that. So that's a little bit more of like a product marketing example, but definitely has to do with content. Any more questions? I think. Well, if there are no more questions, we just wanted to remind you that next month's webinar will be happening on November 14th, 2018. And we heard that you were all very, very excited about social media. And so I am super stoked to have 2 members from my team doing a webinar on essentially like the current state of social media. So thinking beyond engagement and thinking about more than brand awareness when it comes to social media. So you can join them November 14th for an in-depth webinar on the state of social media and how to really make it work for your organization. And we just wanted to say thanks for joining us. If you have any further questions or anything comes up, please feel free to reach out to myself or Robin. We'd be happy to answer them. And other than that, thanks for joining us during your lunch and have a great day.